Darnell Beaumont was 44 years old, and until the day he came home from a 3-week job site in Tennessee, he thought he had a solid marriage. He was a quiet man, a working man, the kind of man his wife Brenda had started calling comfortable, not to his face, but in text messages to the man she'd been seeing for 2 years. Messages Darnell found folded inside a private folder in her home office. Messages where she told her lover that Darnell wouldn't know what to do with real money, that he doesn't pay attention to anything that isn't bolted to the ground. So Brenda did what she and her lover had carefully planned. She filed for divorce, walked away with the house, the accounts, everything they could find. And when Darnell signed those papers without a single argument, she called Preston from the parking garage and laughed, told him Darnell walked away with nothing. Preston laughed too. What neither of them knew was that they would be standing on a marina terrace, drinks in hand, when a helicopter descended from the sky. And when Darnell Beaumont stepped off that helicopter, greeted by name, escorted to a waterfront table where federal clients were already waiting, the laughter stopped completely. What happened next would cost them both everything they thought they'd won. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The gas station off Exit 14 smelled like motor oil and burnt coffee. Darnell Beaumont stood under the flickering fluorescent lights of the snack aisle and reached past the trail mix and the beef jerky without looking. His hand found the small cellophane bag by feel alone. Praline pecans, Brenda's brand. The ones with the extra butter glaze that left a faint shine on your fingertips. He set them on the counter next to his water bottle. 3 weeks in rural Tennessee. 3 weeks of early mornings, muddy boots, and federal inspectors who asked the same questions in slightly different orders. The bridge was a 1960s-era concrete span over a tributary of the Cumberland River, beautiful in the stubborn, utilitarian way of things built to last. It had been showing stress fractures along the eastern support column for 2 seasons. His team had found the root cause on day 4. They spent the remaining 17 days fixing it right. He paid cash, folded the receipt into his shirt pocket out of habit. Outside, his truck sat alone at the pump. A dark blue F-250, 11 years old, clean inside and functional outside. The kind of truck that belonged on a job site and didn't pretend otherwise. He set the pecans on the passenger seat and pulled back onto the interstate. The city grew up around him gradually as he drove. First the billboards and the big box stores, then the neighborhoods tightening, streets getting familiar. He passed the church on Delmore Avenue, where he'd been baptized at 11 years old. Past the lot where Mr. Henley's hardware store used to be before a CVS took its place. He knew every block the way you know a person, not from study, but from years of simply being near them. He turned into their subdivision at 6:30. The evening was warm and soft, the kind that follows a good April rain. Brenda's car was in the garage. That part was normal. Darnell pulled his truck in beside her sedan, cut the engine, and sat for a moment the way he always did after a long drive, letting the quiet settle before he moved into it. He grabbed his duffel from the back seat, picked up the praline pecans, pushed through the door into the kitchen. The house was too still. Not empty still, just held breath still. The kind of quiet that has a shape to it. The kitchen was clean, which was normal. The pendant lights above the island were on low, which was normal. The Williams-Sonoma catalog was spread open on the counter. Normal. Brenda had a subscription she never canceled and never read past the first 10 pages. But the charger plugged into the outlet beside the refrigerator was not normal. Darnell set the pecans down on the counter and looked at it without touching it. A white block charger, USB-C. Brenda used USB-A, always had. She complained every time a new phone required her to buy new cables. This wasn't her charger. The brand name on the side was one he recognized from a competitor's product line. A man's brand, if brands could be said to belong to genders, which they couldn't, but the size of it, the way it sat in the outlet like it lived there, told him something. He moved his eyes to the sink. One mug on the drying rack, white ceramic, thin rim, a half-moon of lipstick on the edge, coral pink, almost terracotta. Brenda wore plum. She had worn plum since the year they got married. She bought the same shade in bulk because she hated the process of finding a new one. Darnell looked at the lipstick mark for exactly 3 seconds. Then he moved his gaze to the catalog on the counter. Something was tucked under the front cover. The corner of a printed page, folded once. He lifted the catalog with 2 fingers, just enough to see it clearly without disturbing the position of anything. A travel itinerary, printed from an email, the font small and neat. A Savannah Inn he recognized, a boutique property on the river, the kind that got written up in Southern Living. 2 names at the top, 1-room reservation. The dates covered last weekend. Last weekend, Darnell had been standing in the mud above the Cumberland River, explaining load transfer to a federal engineer 10 years his junior. He took out his phone, photographed the itinerary, 3 shots, different angles, sharp and clear. Then he lowered the catalog back to its exact position, took the praline pecans and set them beside it, in the natural place where a man would put something he'd bought on his way home. He picked up his duffel and went upstairs. The shower ran hot. He stood under it for a long time, not thinking. That was a skill the Army had given him that civilian life had never managed to take back. When the information was incomplete, you did not run projections. You waited. You collected. You let the structure reveal itself before you put any weight on it. He dried off, put on a clean t-shirt and shorts, lay down on his side of the bed in the dark. The photograph of the itinerary was already saved to a private folder on his phone, one Brenda didn't know existed, one that had never held anything before tonight. He stared at the ceiling. He did not feel rage. Rage was what happened when a structure failed without warning, the shock of something collapsing that you believed was sound. What Darnell felt was different, quieter, more precise. He felt the cold clarity of a man who has just identified a crack in a foundation, and he already knew, with the certainty of someone who had spent 20 years reading broken things, exactly what came next. Darnell was out of the house by 6:15. He moved quietly through the morning routine. Coffee, boots, keys. He paused at the bedroom door for a moment and looked at Brenda sleeping. One arm curled under her pillow. Her breathing slow and even. She looked exactly like the woman he had married 14 years ago. He went downstairs, poured the coffee into a travel mug, and left. At the end of the block, he pulled over and typed a text with his thumb. "Morning. Didn't want to wake you. Have a good day." He sent it, put the truck in drive, went to work. She called at lunch. He was sitting in the cab of his truck in a parking lot off Meridian, eating a sandwich from the deli 2 blocks over. Her name appeared on the screen, and he let it ring once, not to collect himself, because there was nothing to collect. He was already settled. He answered on the second ring. "Hey," he said. "Hey." Her voice was warm, light. "You eat?" "Getting there." "You?" "Just finished. It's crazy here today." She launched into something about a budget meeting, a department head she found difficult, a scheduling conflict that had cascaded into 3 other scheduling conflicts. He listened. He asked one question in the right place. She laughed. A real laugh, easy and unguarded, and said she had to get back. "I'll grab dinner on the way home," he said. "You don't have to do that." "I know. I'll grab it anyway." She said, "Thank you." She said she'd see him later. She hung up. Darnell finished his sandwich and watched a pigeon work at something near the storm drain across the street. Then he went back to work. That week was careful and quiet. He noticed things the way he always noticed things, without staring, without reaction, without giving himself away. Brenda's Tuesday yoga class that ran 40 minutes longer than it used to. The Thursday evening she said she had a work dinner and came home with no receipt in her purse, which she always left on the kitchen island. The way her second phone, a different model from her regular one, kept in her gym bag, buzzed twice on a Saturday morning while she was in the shower. He did not touch the second phone. He did not need to. The shape of the thing was already clear enough to read. On Wednesday of that week, he called Victor. Victor picked up on the first ring, which he always did when it was Darnell. "You're back. How was Tennessee?" "Cold, then muddy. Bridge is solid now." A pause. "I need a number from you." "Name it." "Philippa Cross." A brief silence. Not surprise. Victor didn't do surprise, but the particular silence of a man who is updating his understanding of a situation without being asked to explain it. "Don't ask yet," Darnell said. "Wasn't going to," Victor said. And he wasn't. That was the thing about Victor. 22 years of friendship had taught him that Darnell said exactly what was needed and nothing more, and that the appropriate response to that was exactly the same. "I'll text you the number in 5 minutes. Appreciate it." Another pause. Then, because Victor was Victor, "You eating?" "I'm fine." "That's not what I asked." "I'm eating." "Good," Victor said, and hung up. The number arrived in 4 minutes. He found the folder on a Friday. He had gone into Brenda's home office looking for the insurance documents on his truck. The renewal notice had come to the house, and he needed the policy number for a job site form. The documents were in the filing cabinet, second drawer, the way they always were. He found them in under a minute. He was sliding the drawer shut when he noticed the manila folder tucked behind the hanging file tabs at the very back. Nothing written on the tab. No label. Pushed far enough back that you'd miss it if you weren't looking. He looked. He pulled the folder out and opened it on the desk. Printed pages. Screenshots of text messages, printed in batches, dated in the upper corner. He recognized Brenda's contact name at the top of the thread. The other name was Preston Vale. Darnell read the first page standing up. Then he pulled out the desk chair and sat down. The messages went back 14 months. Most of them were what he expected. Arrangements, affirmations, the language of two people building something together in the margins of other lives. He read those with the calm of a man reviewing a structural report he had already suspected was compromised. Then he found the pages where she talked about him. Comfortable. That was her word for what their marriage had become. Not good. Not stable. Comfortable. The way you'd describe a pair of shoes you'd outgrown but hadn't bothered to throw away. He peeked at potential Preston. "I think somewhere around year 6, I realized that's all it was ever going to be." He kept reading. He wouldn't even know what to do with real money. He'd probably put it back into some bridge in the middle of nowhere. He turned the page. He's never going to find out. He doesn't pay attention to anything that isn't bolted to the ground. Darnell sat with that sentence for a moment. Then he took out his phone and photographed every page, slowly, carefully, making sure each image was sharp and complete. When he was finished, he closed the folder and placed it back in the exact position he had found it, behind the hanging files, pushed to the back, tab facing out. He closed the filing cabinet, picked up the insurance documents, turned off the desk lamp. He drove to Aunt Ruthie's house without calling ahead. Ruthie answered the door in her reading glasses and a house dress the color of old goldenrod, a paperback pressed open against her palm. She took one look at Darnell's face and stepped back from the door without saying a word. He followed her to the kitchen. She put the kettle on. He sat at the table. The same table he'd sat at as a boy. The same 4 chairs, the same slight wobble on the left rear leg that Ruthie had refused to fix for 30 years on the grounds that imperfect things built character. He laid his phone on the table and pulled up the photographs. Ruthie sat across from him, set down her book, and read through every image he placed in front of her. She did not speak. She did not react, not with her face, not with her hands, not with the small sounds people make when something lands hard. She simply read. When she finished, she folded her hands on the table and was quiet for a moment. "Well," she said. She looked at him over the top of her reading glasses. "Let's make sure the paperwork is right." That was the thing about Ruthie. She had been a tax attorney for 38 years. She had spent 4 of those decades watching people, good people, careful people, lose things they should have kept because they trusted the wrong structures at the wrong time. The structure she had built for Darnell was different. It had started years ago, after a commercial client stiffed him on a major contract, a $280,000 job completed in full, invoiced correctly, and simply never paid. The client dissolved the LLC, took the assets sideways into a shell company, left Darnell holding nothing but legal fees and a lesson. He had driven to Ruthie's then, too, sat at this same table. She had listened, and then she had said, "We're going to build this so it can't happen again to anyone." She had helped him structure Beaumont Infrastructure Solutions through a revocable trust, established before the marriage, documented to the day. On paper, the marital estate was what it appeared to be. A modest house, joint accounts with a respectable balance, a small investment portfolio. Reasonable, believable, the kind of picture a man like Darnell was supposed to have. The rest, the contracts, the firm's equity, the federal portfolio, all $4.2 million of it, lived inside a structure that predated Brenda Beaumont by 3 years, legally unreachable, thoroughly documented, and completely invisible to anyone who didn't know where to look. Ruthie had not built it out of suspicion toward Brenda. She had built it out of knowledge about the world, the specific knowledge of a woman who had spent decades watching careful people lose careful things, and who had decided her nephew would not be among them. Tonight, sitting across from him at the kitchen table, she pulled her legal pad from the drawer she always kept it in and uncapped her pen. "Tell me everything," she said. "In order. Don't leave anything out." He did. She wrote, and by the time the kettle had gone cold and the kitchen light outside had shifted from gold to gray, the paperwork was not just right. It was airtight. He drove home as the last of the sun dropped behind the tree line. Philip Across's number was saved in his phone. The photographs were in the private folder, alongside the itinerary from the first night. Ruthie's notes were in Ruthie's drawer, where only Ruthie would find them. He pulled into the driveway and sat in the truck for a moment, the engine ticking as it cooled. The praline pecans were still on the passenger seat. He looked at them. Then he left them. He got out of the truck, went inside. Brenda was in the kitchen, the television on low in the other room, something that smelled like garlic and butter on the stove. She turned when she heard him come in and smiled. Easy, warm, completely unguarded. "Perfect timing," she said. "I was just about to call you." Darnell set his keys on the hook by the door. "Smells good," he said. And he meant it. Because he was, at his core, a man who noticed the real things, the good ones as well as the broken ones. He had always been that way. It had never been weakness. He washed his hands at the kitchen sink and asked her how her day was. She told him. He listened. Brenda filed on a Tuesday. The papers arrived at Darnell's office by process server at 10:47 in the morning. The man at the door was polite, professional, gone in under 60 seconds. Darnell signed for the envelope, thanked him, and closed the door. He sat at his desk and read every page. Not quickly. Not with the controlled skim of a man bracing against the content. He read the way he read structural reports, methodically, completely, noting every figure and every claim. The house, the joint accounts, the modest investment portfolio, the personal property itemized in a numbered list that confirmed what Darnell had always known. Brenda had done her homework on exactly the right things, in exactly the wrong places. When he finished, he set the papers down and called Philippa. She picked up on the second ring. "It came," he said. "I know," Philippa said. "Her attorney called my office this morning. We're on file." A brief pause. Precise. Unhurried. "How do you want to proceed?" "The same way we planned." "Then I'll have everything ready. You won't need to bring anything to the table." "Good," Darnell said. He hung up, straightened the papers into a clean stack, slid them into the envelope, and placed the envelope in the top drawer of his desk. Then he pulled up the site plans he had been reviewing before the knock at the door and got back to work. What Darnell did not know, but would learn later, from Tamara, over coffee at a diner neither of them usually frequented, was that Brenda had not filed impulsively. She had been careful, deliberate. Preston had arranged it. He had a private attorney, a careful man who knew how to research a marital estate without leaving obvious footprints. That attorney ran the standard searches on Darnell's financial profile: property records, business filings, public assets, the joint accounts, the investment portfolio. He found exactly what Darnell had designed for the world to find: a modest, sensible picture of a working man who had built a comfortable but unremarkable life. Preston reviewed the findings personally. Then he called Brenda. "He's exactly what he looks like," he told her. Brenda filed the next morning. The signing was held in a neutral conference room on the 14th floor of a building downtown. Gray carpet, a long table, windows facing a parking structure. Brenda arrived first. She wore a deep burgundy blouse and her good earrings. She sat with her hands folded and her expression composed. The careful neutrality of a woman who has been rehearsing this moment for longer than she would ever admit out loud. Tamara sat beside her, quiet and straight-backed, a cup of coffee she had barely touched in front of her. Darnell arrived 7 minutes before the scheduled time. Work boots, clean dark jeans, a jacket he'd pressed that morning. Nothing about him announced itself. He nodded at Brenda when he entered. She nodded back. The room held the particular silence of a place where people come to finish things. Philippa sat beside him and slid the documents across the table one section at a time. Darnell read each page before he signed it. Every page. Brenda's attorney, a tall man in a very good suit, shifted once in his chair but said nothing. There was nothing to say. Darnell was not stalling. He was simply reading, the way a man who has built his life on precision reads anything placed in front of him. He did not argue over the house. He did not contest the joint accounts. He accepted the terms as written, signed where Philippa indicated, and moved to the next page. When the last signature was down, Darnell straightened the lapels of his jacket, capped his pen, and looked across the table at Brenda's attorney. "Thank you for your time," he said. Then he looked at Brenda. One beat, quiet and complete. "I wish you well, Brenda." He picked up his copy of the documents, shook Philippa's hand, and left the room. Brenda called Preston from the parking garage. Tamara was with her, her heels clicking beside her sister across the concrete, as Brenda pulled out her phone, still riding the energy of how clean it had all been, how easy. She had prepared for a war, and instead found a man who sat down, signed his name, and walked out. She put the call on speaker. Preston picked up on the first ring. "Done," she said. The word came out bright and a little breathless. He didn't fight a single thing, Preston. Not one thing. He just signed, took his copy, and left. Preston's voice filled the concrete space between the parked cars, warm and satisfied. He just gave you everything and walked away with nothing. A short laugh. "That is the saddest thing I've ever heard." Brenda laughed. It was genuine, giddy even, the release of weeks of careful composure, finally given permission to unwind. She was still laughing when she reached the car. Tamara stood at the passenger side and said nothing. She had not laughed in the elevator. She had not laughed crossing the garage. She stood now with her hand on the car door, watching her sister's face, the brightness in it, the relief, the satisfaction, and her expression held something that was not quite judgment, not quite worry. It was the look of a woman who had heard something she could not unhear and did not yet know what to do with it. 3 days later, Preston booked a celebration weekend at a marina waterfront club 40 minutes from the city. A terrace table, 2 other couples, a long Saturday afternoon with good wine, and the pleasant warmth of people toasting a well-executed plan. Brenda wore white. She looked happy. She looked, Tamara thought, like a woman who had not yet finished counting her winnings. They were on the terrace when the helicopter came in. It descended from the southeast, clean and unhurried. A Bell 505 in a dark corporate livery, moving with the easy precision of a machine that had done this particular approach many times before. It set down on the marina's helipad with a low, settling thump that drew a few casual glances from the terrace. The rotors were still slowing when the door opened. Darnell stepped out. Dark slacks, a clean linen shirt, open at the collar. He moved without hurry across the helipad toward the marina's main entrance, where the general manager was already crossing the dock to greet him. By name, with a handshake, and the easy familiarity of a man welcoming a known and valued guest. Together, they walked toward the waterfront dining area, where 2 men in dressed business casual were already on their feet at a corner table, hands extended. Brenda's glass stopped halfway to her mouth. Preston said something. His voice landed somewhere beside her, but she did not hear the words. Tamara set her drink down very slowly. The base of the glass touched the table without a sound. She turned and looked at her sister, not with surprise, not with satisfaction, but with the quiet, steady expression of a woman watching something become exactly what she had always suspected it might be. The laughter from the parking garage was still in the air between them. It had already begun to change. The federal clients, 2 men named Garrett and Holloway, both from the Army Corps Regional Office, were easy to work with. They spoke in the same language Darnell used: load tolerances, environmental impact windows, contractor staging schedules, the kind of conversation that moved efficiently because everyone at the table had earned their way into it. Darnell kept his focus on the plans spread between the water glasses. A waterway access project, 3 phases, federal funding already approved, and waiting on final site assessment. Garrett had questions about tidal variation at the primary access point. Holloway wanted to discuss subcontractor requirements. Darnell answered each question once, clearly, and moved them forward. He was aware of the terrace. He did not look at it. Brenda came to the table about 20 minutes into the meeting. He saw her before she was halfway across the dock, her white dress bright in the afternoon sun, her posture carrying that particular combination of purpose and performance she had always used when approaching a situation she had not fully prepared for. Preston was a few steps behind her, slower, hands in his pockets. Darnell set down his pen. He rose from his chair before she reached the table, unhurried, the way he did everything. Brenda. His voice was even, not cold, not warm. The temperature of a man who has already filed this particular interaction under a category that requires no emotional energy. Darnell. She stopped at the edge of the table. Her eyes moved briefly across the plans, the federal portfolio binder, the 2 men who had turned to look at her. Something crossed her face. Quick, controlled, gone. Garrett. Holloway. Darnell gestured easily between them. This is Brenda, my former wife. He said it the way a man says any accurate fact. No weight on it. No edge. Just the word that fit. Brenda, these are colleagues. We're in the middle of something. Garrett nodded politely. Holloway offered a brief smile. Brenda shook both their hands with the smooth competence of a woman who ran a hospital administration office and knew how to work a room, even when the room had stopped being hers. Then Darnell extended his own hand to her. She took it. A handshake. Firm, brief, complete. Good to see you, he said. It meant nothing, and he knew it, and she knew it. And that was exactly the point. He was already turning back to his chair when Preston stepped forward. Preston was the kind of man who always stepped forward. He had the build for it, broad through the shoulders, taller than Darnell by 2 inches, the easy physical confidence of someone who had spent a long time winning rooms just by entering them. He extended his hand with the smooth, automatic motion of a man who had never once imagined a handshake could go wrong. Darnell took the hand. He held it 1 beat past where comfort lives. Not long enough to be a scene, long enough to be a statement. His eyes stayed level with Preston's. No anger in them, no heat at all. "I know who you are," Darnell said, quietly, just the two of them inside it. Then he released the hand, turned back to the table, and sat down. "Sorry about that," he said to Garrett and Holloway, pulling the plans back toward him. "You were asking about the tidal variation window." Garrett cleared his throat and picked up exactly where they had left off. The meeting ran another 40 minutes. Darnell walked the two men back to the marina's main dock when it concluded, shook their hands in the easy way of people who will work together again and know it, and watched their car pull out of the lot. Then he crossed back to the helipad, spoke briefly with the pilot, and climbed aboard. The Bell 505 lifted clean and turned southeast. He did not look down at the terrace as it fell away below him. Tamara drove home alone. She had told Brenda she had an early morning. It was true, but it was not the reason she left. She sat in her apartment that evening with the television on and the volume low and the image of Darnell stepping off that helicopter running quietly through her mind on a loop she could not find the switch for. The easy walk, the marina manager crossing the dock to meet him, the 2 federal men already on their feet. She thought about the parking garage. She thought about her sister's voice on that speaker call. Bright and giddy, he didn't fight a single thing. And the way Preston's laugh had bounced off the concrete walls. She thought about every word Brenda had ever used to describe Darnell to her. Comfortable, piqued. A good man, just not a big one. She picked up her phone, set it back down, picked it up again. She found Darnell's number. She had kept it through the divorce the way she kept most things, quietly and without announcement, and typed, "It's Tamara. I'd like to meet. Just us. When you have time." His reply came 11 minutes later. "Tomorrow morning. There's a diner on Clement Street. 8 o'clock work?" She typed back, "I'll be there." The diner on Clement Street had vinyl booths the color of old mustard and coffee that arrived before you asked for it. Tamara was there first. She ordered a cup and sat with both hands around it and watched the door. Darnell came in at 8 exactly. He spotted her, nodded, and slid into the booth across from her with the unhurried ease of a man who had agreed to this conversation and had nothing to protect in it. The waitress appeared. He ordered coffee, black, no menu. Tamara looked at him across the table. This man she had known for 14 years, who had fixed things around her apartment without being asked, who had remembered how she took her coffee, who had never once raised his voice in any room she had ever shared with him, and said, "I saw your face at the marina when you shook her hand." She paused. "You weren't surprised she was there?" "No," he said. "Were you surprised by any of it? The filing? Any of it?" Darnell wrapped both hands around his mug. "I found the folder in her office about 6 weeks before she filed. Text messages. Her and Preston." Tamara's jaw tightened. She kept printed copies. She did. A silence. The diner moved around them, plates clattering, a short-order cook calling something to the back, the low murmur of a Tuesday morning. Darnell! Tamara set her cup down. What did she actually walk away from? Because what I saw yesterday on that dock was not what she described to me. It was not what either of them described. He looked at her for a moment. Reading her, she knew, the way he always did, quietly and without apology, and finding whatever he was looking for. Then he told her, all of it. The trust structure, established before the marriage, with Ruthie's guidance, after a client had once left him financially exposed on a major contract, and he had vowed privately never to let that happen again. The firm, Beaumont Infrastructure Solutions, fully owned through that trust, invisible to any standard search of the marital estate. The federal portfolio, 11 years of contracts, quietly compounding, carefully structured. The number. He said it once, plainly, the way he said every accurate thing. Tamara did not move for a moment. 4.2, she said. Yes. She exhaled slowly through her nose. Outside the window, a bus went by. Inside the diner, someone laughed at a table near the back. She had him research you, Tamara said. Her voice had gone careful, not protective, careful. Preston's attorney. Brenda told me. This was 2 years ago, before any of this was in motion, at least as far as I knew. She said she wanted to know what she was working with before she made any decisions. Darnell nodded slowly. They ran the searches, Tamara continued. Property records, business filings, the joint accounts. Preston reviewed it all personally. Told her. She stopped. Tell me what he said, Darnell said. Quietly. No pressure in it. Tamara looked at him. He's exactly what he looks like. The diner hummed around them. Darnell picked up his mug, took a slow drink. They did their homework, he said. They did, Tamara said. They just did it on the wrong house. Neither of them said anything for a moment. Then Tamara looked across the booth at him. Really looked, the way she had not allowed herself to fully do since the marina, and said quietly, she was so sure. Darnell nodded once. I know, he said. That's what I was counting on. Tamara held his gaze for a beat. Then she reached for the check, her half of it, set her money on the table and slid out of the booth. Darnell watched her walk to the door and out into the morning. He finished his coffee slowly, set the mug down, looked out the window at the street where the day was going about its business, indifferent and complete. Then he left the tip, buttoned his jacket, and headed back to the office. The call came on a Thursday morning. Darnell was at his desk reviewing load calculations for a drainage project in coastal Alabama when his cell lit up with Victor's name. He picked up on the second ring. Got an interesting one, Victor said. A man called the main office line this morning. Preston Vale, real estate developer. Said he's interested in exploring a potential partnership. Wants a sit-down meeting. Darnell said nothing for a moment. Outside his office window, the city was doing its regular Thursday business. Traffic moving, a delivery truck idling at the corner, pigeons working a crack in the sidewalk with great seriousness of purpose. Except the meeting, Darnell said. A beat of silence from Victor's end. Then, yep, thought so. Preston arrived on a Tuesday at 11. He came in wearing a charcoal suit that fit him the way expensive things do, like it had been built around him specifically, which it probably had. A watch that caught the lobby light. Shoes with the kind of quiet shine that requires regular professional attention. He walked through the front door of Beaumont Infrastructure Solutions the way men like him walked into rooms they expected to own. Shoulders squared, pace measured, chin up just enough. Then he stopped. Not obviously. Not in a way that announced itself. But Darnell, watching through the glass panel beside the conference room door, saw it. That almost invisible pause as Preston took in the staffed reception desk. The framed federal project certificates lining the far wall, the size of the floor plate, the 3 people who crossed the lobby in the 40 seconds it took for him to check in. He recovered fast. Credit where it was due. Preston Vale knew how to recover. He was smiling by the time the receptionist walked him back to the conference room. Full warmth, easy confidence. The performance of a man who had seen this kind of office before and was perfectly comfortable in it. Darnell was already seated when Preston entered. Victor stood near the window, portfolio in hand, and nodded once. They shook hands. Preston sat. He opened his pitch the way a man does when he's been practicing it. Smooth, natural, sequenced with care. He positioned his development network as an asset with regional reach. He talked about coastal mixed-use projects with federal adjacency potential. He used the words synergy and complementary expertise without apparent embarrassment. He was good. Darnell would give him that. He was polished and specific, and he knew how to make the person across the table feel like a partner rather than a target. If Darnell had not already known exactly who was sitting across from him, exactly what he had done and why, it might have played differently. But he did know. So he sat, and he listened. And he let Preston build the whole thing up brick by brick without touching a single one. When Preston finished, he leaned back slightly and let the pitch land in the silence. A move designed to feel confident, but was actually a question. Darnell nodded slowly. "I appreciate the time," he said, "and I can see what you're building toward. But it's not the right fit for us right now. Our federal project load has the firm committed through the next 2 fiscal years minimum, and any partnership we'd consider at this stage would need to align with that pipeline in ways I don't think your current portfolio maps to." He said it warmly. He said it with the complete finality of a closed door. "I hope you find the right collaboration." Preston held the smile. It cost him something, but he held it. "Of course," he said. "Good to see the firm doing what it's doing. Genuinely." He stood, gathered his materials. Darnell stood with him, and they shook hands again, and Darnell walked him 2 steps toward the door. Then, without inflection, without pausing, in the same register he had used to discuss tidal variation windows and drainage gradients, "I'll give Brenda your best." Preston's hand was already reaching for the door handle. He didn't stop, but something in his shoulder changed, a fraction of a degree, barely visible. He left without looking back. Victor closed the conference room door and set a folder on the table. Neat, tabbed, thorough, the kind of file that said standard practice on the outside, and "I've been waiting for this meeting on the inside." "Due diligence," Victor said simply. "Pulled it before we confirmed the meeting." Darnell opened it. The Bentley was leased. That was the first page, and it was the least surprising item in the folder. The development firm was carrying $2.3 million in deferred debt against a rate environment that had been climbing for 14 months. 2 former business partners had active civil suits filed against Preston for misrepresentation of investment value. A third had retained counsel the previous month, his calculation about the cost of pursuing Preston apparently having recently changed. Then the item Victor had flagged in the margin with a single small checkmark. Preston had been courting 2 regional investors, Gerald Whitmore and Arthur Fenn, for the better part of a year. Their capital commitment was not a growth opportunity for Preston. It was the load-bearing wall. Without it, his primary lender's covenant clause triggered an automatic portfolio review. Without the review surviving, the deferred debt became immediately callable. Darnell read it all the way through, turned the last page, sat with the complete picture for a moment. Brenda had left a man with $4.2 million and walked toward a man who owed $2.3 and needed a lifeline to stay standing through the next 18 months. He closed the folder, slid it back across the table to Victor. "Good," Darnell said. "Let it play out." He picked up the site plans he had been reviewing before the meeting and returned to work. The first call came on a Friday afternoon. Darnell was in the truck, stopped at a light 3 blocks from the office, when Brenda's name appeared on the screen. He let it ring through. Then he typed, "Anything legal? Copy Philippa." He set the phone face down on the passenger seat and drove. She called again Saturday morning. Same response. Sunday evening. Same response. Monday at lunch. A text this time instead of a call. "Darnell, I just need 5 minutes." And he responded the same way he always did. The same 7 words. Because 7 words was the right number, and there was nothing else to add. By Wednesday, she had stopped calling and started driving. He heard the buzzer from the kitchen, where he was heating water for coffee. He looked at the intercom display, stood there for a moment, then pressed the button. "Come up," he said. She looked the way a composed woman looks when composure is costing her something. Hair done, good coat, posture correct. But her eyes moved around the apartment quickly when he opened the door, taking in the clean lines, the high ceilings, the framed site blueprints on the wall, the view of the city through the wide window. He watched her do the math and come up short. "Water?" he said. "Sure." He brought 2 glasses, set hers on the coffee table in front of the couch where she sat, and lowered himself into the chair across from her. He didn't cross his arms. He didn't lean forward. He sat the way he always sat, steady, open, completely still. She looked at him for a moment like she was deciding where to start. "Why didn't you fight it?" she said. "The divorce, the house, the accounts. You just signed everything. You didn't argue a single line." Darnell considered her for a quiet beat. "Would you have stayed?" he said. The question landed and just sat there between them. Brenda opened her mouth, closed it. She looked down at the glass of water she hadn't touched. She didn't answer, because there was no answer that served her, and she was still too smart not to know that. The room held its silence for a moment. Outside the window, the city moved through its Wednesday evening without any interest in what was happening in this apartment. Then Brenda looked up. "When did you have all of this?" Her voice was measured, careful, but underneath it was something else. The sound of a woman pressing on a wall she expected to give and finding it solid. The apartment, She stopped, started again. "Darnell." "When?" He set his water glass down on the end table beside his chair. "The trust was established 11 years ago," he said. "Beaumont Infrastructure Solutions has been operating under it since the beginning. The federal portfolio built over time. The first major contract came in about 9 years back. The firm's been growing every year since." Brenda stared at him. 11 years, she said. 11 years! The word 11 moved across her face like a current. He could see her doing what she always did, calculating, recalibrating, running the numbers backward through time. 14 years of marriage. 11 years of this existing inside it, invisible to her. "I don't understand," she said. "We shared. I thought I knew." She stopped herself, pressed her lips together. "Why didn't you tell me?" "I never hid it from malice," Darnell said. His voice was the same as it had been since she walked through the door, even unhurried, no heat in it anywhere. "I built it the way I build anything. Load-bearing structure goes into the foundation. You don't leave it exposed at the surface where weather can reach it. A client stiffed me early on. Big contract. Walked away clean. Ruthie helped me make sure it couldn't happen again." He paused. "I wasn't building it against you. I was building it right." Brenda's jaw tightened slightly. "And you never thought to tell me." "You never asked what I was building," he said. "You decided what I was worth, and you stopped looking." That landed. She looked away toward the window. He let the silence sit for 3 full seconds. Then he spoke, not loudly, not sharply, in the same quiet register he'd used for the entire conversation. "You spent 2 years planning your exit, Brenda. I spent 11 years building mine." He held her eyes when she turned back to him. "You just left first." Something crossed her face that was not quite grief and not quite anger, and was probably, underneath everything, recognition. The specific recognition of a woman who had done everything right, researched, planned, executed, filed, and was only now understanding that every single step had been taken on a blueprint with a column missing. There was no argument available to her. She had checked his finances. Preston had checked his finances. They had been thorough and careful, and completely certain. The room was quiet for a long moment. Then Brenda stood. She picked up her bag from the cushion beside her. She looked at him once, briefly, without readable expression, and walked to the door. She did not say anything. She pulled it open, stepped through, and was gone. Tamara was parked at the curb in the gray sedan, engine idling. She saw Brenda come through the building's front door and watched her cross the sidewalk. One look at her sister's face was enough. She said nothing. She put the car in drive. She pulled away from the curb and pointed them toward home, and the silence between them stayed unbroken all the way there. The kitchen smelled like it always had. Collard greens and cornbread, and something sweet doing its slow work in the oven. Ruthie kept the overhead light low in the evenings and used the lamp on the counter instead, and the warm yellow of it fell across the table the way it always had. The same table where Darnell had spread out those photographs weeks ago and watched his great-aunt read every page without flinching. Victor was already there when Darnell arrived, jacket off, sleeves rolled, helping Ruthie carry dishes from the stove. That was the thing about Victor. He made himself at home wherever Darnell considered home. He had been doing it since they were 19 years old, sharing a dorm room the size of a generous closet. They ate without rushing. Ruthie asked about the Tennessee project. Victor talked about a staffing question he needed to resolve before the new division launched. The conversation moved the way dinner conversation moves between people who have nothing to prove to each other. Easy, unhurried, full of the particular comfort that comes from being in a room where you don't have to manage anyone's impression of you. It was only after Ruthie cleared the main dishes and refilled the sweet tea that Victor set his phone face up on the table and said, "Everything's confirmed." Darnell nodded. "Final press release is ready," Victor said. "Communications consultant signed off this afternoon. Regional business press gets it first thing Wednesday morning. Infrastructure trade journals the same day. The profile piece runs Thursday in the regional edition. That's the one with the full firm history, the federal portfolio breakdown, the trust longevity detail." He paused. "Gerald Whitmore gets the trade journal. Arthur Fenn is on the regional business press list. Both of them will have it before 9 a.m. "Good," Darnell said. That was all. He picked up his tea. Victor leaned back in his chair with the expression of a man restraining himself from saying several things at once. Ruthie studied Darnell from across the table. She had her glass in both hands, watching him the way she had always watched him. Not waiting for him to crack, but seeing him clearly, the way very few people ever had. "You could let it rest now," she said. Darnell met her eyes. "I have." She held his gaze for a moment. Then she looked at Victor. "He just wants to watch the last piece fall," Victor said. He was not quite smiling, close to it. Ruthie looked back at Darnell. Her expression didn't change, but something in it sharpened slightly. The look of a woman who has known someone long enough to call the difference between two things that resemble each other. "That's not letting go," she said. Darnell was quiet for a beat. Then the corner of his mouth moved. "No," he said. "That's engineering." Ruthie held the look on him for one more second. Then she made a small sound that was not quite agreement and not quite argument, and lifted her sweet tea and drank. Victor looked at the ceiling briefly, like a man offering quiet thanks to no one in particular. The announcement was not an attack. That was the thing Darnell had been clear about with himself from the beginning. The $38 million contract was real. The largest federal waterway restoration project Beaumont Infrastructure Solutions had ever been awarded, the result of a proposal that had taken 14 months and an engineering team working at a level of precision that left no room for doubt. The work was the work. It had always been the work. Making it visible was simply the last act of an honest record. What Gerald Whitmore and Arthur Fenn did with that record, what they remembered when they read Darnell's name and his photograph, and the clean documented history of a firm they'd been told didn't scale, that was not something Darnell had engineered. He had simply made sure the truth was loud enough to reach the same rooms as the lie. The rest would take care of itself. It already was. Ruthie walked him to the door after dinner. Victor was still at the table, finishing the last of the bread with the ease of a man who knew he was always welcome for the leftovers. At the door, Ruthie took his hand. She didn't say anything. She just held it for a moment, firm, brief, the grip of a woman who had been steady for him since before he knew he would need steadiness. And then, let go. He drove home through the city, the same streets he had always known, quiet now at this hour. His phone lit up on the nightstand at 10:47. Victor. He opened the message. The final press release draft, clean and complete, Darnell's name and photograph at the top, the contract number and scope below it. The firm's full federal history laid out in plain, factual language that required nothing from anyone except the willingness to read it. Darnell read it through once. Then he typed, approved, sent it, set the phone down. He turned off the lamp, lay back. For the first time since that night in the dark, with the ceiling above him and the photograph already saved to a private folder on his phone, the quiet inside him matched the quiet of the room. He was asleep before midnight. He did not wake until morning. Victor's text came in at 7:04 a.m. It's out. Darnell read it, set his phone face down on the desk, and went back to the Gulf region site plans spread across his drafting table. There was a tidal access question on the coastal corridor project that needed resolving before the next site visit. He circled the section, made a note in the margin, and kept working. Outside his office window, the city was doing what it always did at that hour. Buses running, delivery trucks double-parked, the ordinary machinery of a Wednesday morning moving through its motions with complete indifference to what had just gone live in every regional business inbox from here to the coast. That was fine with Darnell. He had never needed the world to move differently. He just needed it to see clearly when the moment arrived. Across town, Preston Vale arrived at the restaurant 4 minutes early. He did that. Arrived early to meetings he needed to control. It gave him the table, the sight lines, the first impression. He had been managing first impressions his entire professional life, and he was genuinely good at it. The Whitmore Fenn meeting had been 6 weeks in the making. He had laid the groundwork carefully. The right dinners, the right language, the patient cultivation of two men who did not say yes quickly and said no even more slowly. He could feel the capital commitment forming. He had been in enough rooms to know the temperature of a yes, still hardening. Gerald Whitmore arrived first, shook Preston's hand, and sat down without his usual small talk. That registered briefly. Gerald was a man who liked small talk, who used it the way some men used a handshake to take a measure. But Preston filed it away and moved forward. Arthur Fenn arrived 2 minutes later, nodded, sat, accepted coffee. They ordered. The table settled. Then Gerald set his phone face up between them. He didn't say anything. He didn't gesture toward it or offer any framing. He simply placed it on the white tablecloth and left it there, the way a man sets down a document he expects to speak for itself. The screen showed a profile piece from the Regional Business Journal. At the top, a photograph. Darnell Beaumont, standing in front of a federal waterway site, hard hat in hand, relaxed in the way of a man who belongs in the landscape completely. Below it, a headline. Below that, a number. $38 million. Preston looked at the screen for 1 moment. Then he looked up. Arthur was reading. He read the full thing, slowly, with the unhurried patience of a man who charges his attention at a rate that reflects its actual value. When he finished, he looked up at Preston. "You said something at the Hargrove dinner," Arthur said. His voice was even and without accusation. He might have been reading a site survey. The kind of guy who's good with his hands but doesn't scale. Preston opened his mouth. "That was March," Gerald said. "This firm has been running federal contracts for over a decade." He glanced at the phone. "This particular contract has been in proposal development for 14 months. He picked up his coffee cup, held it in both hands, and looked at Preston with the measured patience of a man who had already finished the calculation. Which means, when you said it, you either didn't know, or you did. The distinction was not subtle. In this world, not knowing was incompetence. Knowing and saying it anyway was something else. Something that ended conversations, retracted handshakes, triggered the quiet, industry-wide phone calls that never left a record, but always left a result. Preston had lived in this world long enough to understand exactly what was being said without being said. He reached for the version of himself that had always been able to talk his way back to level ground. He felt it there, the pivot, the reframe, the practiced warmth that had walked him out of tighter rooms than this one. He began to speak. Gerald raised one hand, just slightly, just enough. Preston stopped. The table held a silence that lasted no longer than 3 seconds and felt considerably longer. "We appreciate the time," Gerald said. He and Arthur stood. They shook Preston's hand. Brief, correct, the specific courtesy of men whose decision had already been made before they arrived. Then they walked out of the restaurant together, neither of them looking back. Preston sat alone at the table for a long time. The Whitmore Fenn announcement came 10 days later. Whitmore Fenn Capital Partners has entered a strategic development agreement with Beaumont Infrastructure Solutions for coastal and waterway-adjacent real estate projects across 3 Gulf states. The partnership is valued at $14 million in initial committed capital, with expansion provisions tied to federal contract milestones. The press release did not mention Preston Vale. It did not need to. Everyone in the regional development world who had watched Preston court these 2 men for the better part of a year, who had heard him at dinners and conferences, positioning himself as the natural fit for exactly this kind of capital relationship, read the announcement and arrived at the same understanding without being guided toward it. The industry was like that. It processed information quietly, drew conclusions without announcement, and recalibrated without ceremony. Men Preston had brought into the business early in his career stopped returning his calls, not all at once. One, then another, then a third. The way temperature drops by degrees before you realize the room has gone cold. A commercial broker he had worked with for a decade quietly redirected 2 referrals that would have moved through Preston's firm. A development consortium that had kept him on its peripheral contact list removed him without any communication at all. He simply stopped receiving the quarterly updates and understood what that meant. No confrontations, no explanation. No one said a word directly to his face. They didn't need to. The industry simply recalibrated around his absence, the way it always did when a man's reputation shifted from asset to liability. His primary lender initiated a formal portfolio review the same week the Whitmore Fenn announcement circulated. The $2.3 million in deferred debt, carried against projections that now had no investor backing, and an interest rate environment that had stopped being forgiving, triggered the covenant review clause Preston's own attorney had flagged 18 months ago. He had dismissed it then. He could not dismiss it now. The third civil suit plaintiff, who had been calculating the cost of litigation against the likelihood of recovery, retained counsel that same week. His calculation had changed. Preston was no longer a difficult target. He was a retreating one. His firm did not collapse. It listed. It took on water in the quiet, compounding way that over-leveraged structures always do. Not a dramatic failure, but a slow series of surrenders. A project paused. A contract not renewed. A capable staff member who found another position and was not replaced. Brenda's world recalibrated with less noise but equal precision. People in her hospital administration network had access to business press. They attended the same events where she and Preston had appeared together, performing the life she had decided she deserved. They now held the complete picture, and they arranged themselves around it accordingly. Invitations slowed. Calls thinned. The social architecture she had built over years quietly adjusted its shape around her changed circumstances, not collapsing, just contracting in the particular way that happens when the story a person has been telling stops matching the story everyone else can see. No one said anything to her face. No one ever did. On Thursday morning, Darnell's standing call with Victor began the way it always did. Site updates, contract timelines, a staffing question for the new division. Then Victor said, "You want to hear about the breakfast?" Darnell set down his pencil. "Go ahead." Victor told him the full account. Gerald's phone on the table. Arthur's precise recollection of Preston's exact words at the Hargrove dinner in March. The one raised hand. The brief, final handshake. Preston sitting alone after they left. Darnell listened without interrupting. When Victor finished, there was a brief silence on the line. "You didn't engineer that," Victor said. It wasn't a question. "No," Darnell said. "The man dismissed you at a dinner party to the exact people who'd eventually have to choose between you." "He did." Another silence. Then Victor said, "That's almost elegant." Darnell considered it for a moment. Outside his window, a delivery truck pulled away from the curb, and the street opened up again, ordinary and unhurried. "No," he said finally. "That's just what happens when you build something real. Eventually, people can see it, and then they can see everything next to it." He ended the call, picked up his pencil, returned to the site plans. The call came down from the front desk at 2:14 on a Saturday afternoon. Darnell was at his kitchen table with a set of Gulf region survey maps and a cup of coffee that had gone lukewarm. His phone buzzed once. He read the message from the front desk attendant. "A Mr. Preston Vale is in the lobby and is asking if you have a moment," and set the phone face down on the table. He sat with it for exactly as long as it took to finish the coffee. Then he put on his shoes and took the elevator down. The lobby was clean and quiet in the way of a Saturday afternoon. The front desk attendant at his post. A woman near the mailboxes sorting through envelopes. Afternoon light coming through the glass entrance doors in long, pale rectangles across the floor. Preston was standing near the seating area by the window. He was dressed well. Dark slacks, an open collar, the kind of casual that takes effort. He looked like a man who had decided on the way over that composure was the only card he had left to play, and had committed to it fully. He saw Darnell step off the elevator and move toward him with his hand already extended. Confident. Practiced. The walk of a man who had talked his way through difficult rooms before and expected to do it again. Darnell shook his hand. Then he gestured toward the seating area by the window. 2 chairs, a low table, a clear sight line to the front desk, and sat down. Preston sat across from him. He glanced briefly toward the elevator, toward the stairwell, the reflexive read of a man accustomed to assessing which direction a room opens. Then he settled, leaned forward with his elbows on his knees, and looked at Darnell with the focused sincerity of a man delivering a presentation he has rehearsed. "I'll be straight with you," Preston said. "I know the timing on this is unusual, but I think you're a man who appreciates directness." Darnell said nothing. He simply watched. "What you've built is real," Preston continued. "The federal portfolio, the Whitmore-Fenn partnership, that's serious work. And I think a man at your level, moving into Gulf state development, could use someone who knows that regional landscape the way I do. The relationships I have down there took years to build." He paused for a beat, let the offer breathe. "I'm not here about anything else. This is a business conversation. I think there's something worth exploring, if you're open to it." He finished, and sat back slightly, confident, waiting. Darnell let the silence run for a moment. He looked at Preston the way he looked at site surveys, without hurry, without visible reaction, reading the full structure before saying anything at all. Then he leaned forward. He spoke quietly enough that Preston had to lean in to hear it. "I know about the civil suits," Darnell said. "I know about the deferred debt. I know about the Bentley." He held eye contact without blinking. "And I know exactly what kind of man tells a woman her husband is small while he's running on borrowed everything. Preston went completely still. The lobby sounds continued around them, the soft chime of an elevator, the front door opening and closing, the city doing its ordinary business on the other side of the glass. None of it touched the space between these two men. "You took something from me," Darnell said. His voice stayed level. No heat in it, no performance, just the plain shape of the truth, spoken cleanly. "But what you took was temporary, and what you gave her in return is going to cost her in ways neither of you budgeted for." He paused once. "That consequence is already in motion. I don't need anything else from you." Preston opened his mouth, closed it. There was nothing available to him. No pivot, no reframe, no version of himself that could walk back to level ground from here. The man sitting across from him had just laid out the complete architecture of Preston's situation. Debts, suits, leased car, borrowed image, and had done it in the same quiet, unhurried voice he might use to describe a load-bearing calculation. No anger, no satisfaction, just precision. Darnell stood. He extended his hand. Preston looked at it for a moment that lasted long enough to mean something. Then he stood and shook it. Darnell turned and walked to the elevator. He pressed the button and waited. The lobby held its quiet. At the elevator doors, just before they opened, he turned back once. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. He simply let the silence hold the full weight of everything that had just been said, and everything that didn't need to be. And then the doors opened, and he stepped inside, and they closed behind him. Preston stood alone in the lobby for a moment. Then he walked to the front entrance. The doorman held the door open with the smooth, practiced neutrality of a man paid to treat everyone the same, regardless of what he had just witnessed. The afternoon light hit Preston's face as he stepped outside. The city moved around him. Foot traffic, a bus pulling away from the stop across the street, two women laughing at something on a phone outside the coffee shop next door. All of it completely indifferent to him. He walked to a silver rental car parked at the curb. He unlocked it, got in, and sat there for a moment before starting the engine. The Bentley had already been returned. 14 months later, the Georgia coast smelled like salt and pine and the particular kind of clean that only comes from open water and morning air that hasn't been touched yet by the heat of the day. Darnell sat on the dock with his coffee and let it settle into him. The property was modest from the road, a clean wood frame house set back behind a line of live oaks, nothing that announced itself. But from the water, it opened up completely. The dock stretched out over a wide, still inlet. Marsh grass lined the far bank in long green rows. The sky was the pale, unhurried blue of a Sunday that had nowhere to be. Behind the house, the Bell 505 sat quiet on the grass pad, its rotors still. The site plans were spread on the weathered table beside him, held flat by a coffee mug and a river stone he'd picked up from a job site in Alabama 2 years ago and hadn't gotten around to putting down. He'd been reviewing them since before sunrise. The Gulf Region contract, Phase 2, coastal access infrastructure along 3 state lines, was moving exactly the way a well-engineered thing should move. On schedule. No surprises. Just the steady, methodical progress of a structure being built right. The $38 million federal waterway contract was in full execution. Victor had sent a project update Thursday. On pace. Client satisfied. Team solid. 3 sentences. That was how Victor communicated when things were going well. When things weren't going well, he called. He hadn't called. The Whitmore-Fenn partnership had expanded into its second phase the previous month. Gerald himself had flown down for the signing, shook Darnell's hand in the firm's downtown conference room, and said, "We should have found you sooner." Darnell had said, "You found me when you needed to." Gerald had laughed. It was a good laugh, the kind that comes from a man recognizing a clean truth. The foundation had funded its first 3 engineering scholarships. His grandmother's name was on the letterhead, on the certificates, on the small brass plaque mounted beside the door of the firm's conference room. 2 of the 3 recipients were the first in their families to attend college. He had read both of their application essays on a Tuesday evening at his kitchen table with a glass of water and no music on. He had not told anyone about that evening. Victor was building out a new division, infrastructure consulting for coastal municipalities, which was exactly the kind of steady, long-term work that compounded quietly over years and decades. Victor had called it boring money. Darnell had told him that was the best kind. Preston Vale's primary development firm had entered receivership 11 weeks ago. Darnell had learned it the same way he learned most things now. A brief message from Victor, a line in a regional business brief, the world simply stating a fact and moving on. The civil litigation continued its slow grind through the courts. The 3rd plaintiff's case had been joined by a 4th. The Bentley had been returned before any of that. Early, quietly, the way expensive performances end when the audience stops paying. Tamara had told him about Brenda and Preston without drama, the way she told him most things now, matter-of-factly, over the phone, with the tone of a woman reporting the weather. Preston had left when staying became unprofitable. Just like that. No scene, no confrontation. Simply gone. Brenda had not contacted Darnell since the afternoon she left his apartment in silence. He had not sought her. He held no active anger toward her. Anger was a load the structure didn't need, and he had learned a long time ago that the loads you carry by choice are the ones that bring a foundation down. Tamara called on Sundays, usually mid-morning. He always answered. At a charity gala for infrastructure education the previous month, in a ballroom full of people performing their generosity in black tie, Darnell had been standing near a window with a glass of water when a woman said, from beside him, "The acoustics in this room are doing something genuinely strange." He had looked over. She was looking up at the ceiling with the focused, slightly puzzled expression of someone actually trying to figure it out. Precise posture, dark dress, reading glasses pushed up on her head like she'd forgotten they were there. He had said, "Lateral deflection in the roof framing. The span is too wide for the support intervals." She had lowered her gaze from the ceiling and looked at him. Then she had laughed, not politely, but genuinely, the kind of laugh surprised out of a person, and said, "Okay. So, what would you have done with the support intervals?" Her name was Josephine. She was an architect, precise and unhurried in conversation, in a way that reminded him of the best engineers he had worked with, people who asked good questions and then actually listened to the answers. They had talked for 45 minutes. He had given her his card at the end of the evening. She had used it within the week. They had dinner twice since then, once at a quiet place near the waterfront, once at a restaurant she chose that turned out to have excellent sight lines and terrible acoustics, which she had pointed out before they sat down and which had made him smile. Now, Darnell folded the site plans into a clean rectangle and finished the last of his coffee. A pelican dropped from somewhere above him and landed on the dock railing with the effortless precision of something that knew exactly where it belonged. It settled its wings, tucked them flat, and stood there looking out at the water with complete authority. Darnell watched it for a moment. Then he picked up the plans, tucked them under his arm, and walked back toward the house, already thinking about the next project, the next structure, the next thing he would build that would outlast everything that had ever tried to make him feel small. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.